I'm Della, 29 years old, and every morning at 6 a.m., I arrange these donated books on my small desk at the Southside Community Center here in Chicago. 5 years I've been doing this despite what my family says about wasting my life. These kids need someone who believes in them, and the worn spines of these books I bought with my grocery money tell more success stories than any corporate report ever could. That invitation hidden in my bag might change everything tonight. Before we begin this story, where are you watching from today? If you've ever been underestimated by your own family, please hit like and subscribe because this journey will show you that sometimes the people closest to us become our biggest obstacles to overcome. The community center sits on the corner of 63rd and Halsted, its red brick facade weathered by 40 Chicago winters. Paint peels from the window frames like old scabs, and the playground equipment outside bears more rust than paint. But inside these walls, something beautiful happens every single day. The hallways display hundreds of drawings, poems, and science projects created by kids who society has already written off before they've even reached middle school. My official title reads Youth Program Coordinator, but that barely scratches the surface of what I actually do here. Yesterday afternoon, I spent 3 hours helping Marcus with his algebra homework. Marcus is 12 years old, and when he first walked through our doors 8 months ago, he had already been suspended from school twice for fighting. His mother works double shifts at the hospital, his father hasn't been around since Marcus was 4, and his older brother runs with the gangster disciples. The streets were calling to Marcus loud and clear, promising quick money and the respect he craved. But something shifted when he joined our after-school program. At first, he sat in the back corner, hood up, arms crossed, radiating hostility toward anyone who tried to approach him. I didn't push. I just made sure he had a snack every day, asked him about his interests without demanding answers, and left art supplies on his desk without comment. It took 6 weeks before he picked up a pencil. Another month before he showed me the portrait he'd drawn of his grandmother. Now, 8 months later, Marcus hasn't been in a single fight. His grades have improved from failing to passing. And last week, his math teacher called to say he'd helped another student understand fractions. Stories like Marcus's are why I wake up at 5 every morning, why I spend my weekends planning activities, why my savings account stays empty, while I buy supplies the center can't afford. Each child who walks through our doors carries a weight no kid should have to bear. Keisha, 8 years old, was reading at a kindergarten level when she started coming here. Her mother never learned to read properly, cycles of poverty spinning through generations. Like a broken record, nobody knows how to stop playing. After months of patient work, extra sessions, and countless picture books, Keisha now reads at grade level. The joy on her face when she finished her first chapter book could have powered the entire South Side for a week. But my family doesn't see any of this as real work. Last Sunday, I sat at my parents' dining room table in their comfortable Oak Park home, listening to the familiar symphony of success as they define it. My older sister Emma had just closed another $1 million real estate deal in Lincoln Park. She described the property in exhausting detail, the marble countertops, the vintage hardwood floors, the proximity to the lake. My parents hung on every word like she was delivering a sermon from the Mount. My younger brother Jake had gotten promoted again at his tech company, his salary now approaching 6 figures at just 26 years old. Dad actually stood up to shake his hand, as if Jake had just returned from war instead of from a conference room. When Mom turned to me with that familiar look of strained patience, I knew what was coming before she opened her mouth. Had I thought any more about Emma's offer to work as her assistant? Surely I could see that my social work degree was, in her words, wasted potential. I had graduated from Northwestern with honors. She reminded the table as if I had somehow forgotten my own academic achievements. I could be making real money by now, contributing to society in a meaningful way. Contributing to society. As if teaching kids to read doesn't contribute. As if keeping teenagers out of gangs doesn't matter. As if providing a safe space for children whose homes are battlegrounds doesn't count as meaningful work. But I've learned not to argue these points at family dinners. It only leads to Emma's condescending smile, and Jake's eye rolls to Dad's newspaper, suddenly becoming urgently interesting, and Mom's disappointed sighs that seem to last for hours. The truth is, I make $28,000 a year. My apartment is a studio in Pilsen, 500 square feet, with a radiator that clangs like a ghost in chains and windows that let in more cold air than they keep out. My car is a 2004 Honda Civic, with 180,000 miles on it held together by prayer and duct tape. I shop at thrift stores, clip coupons, and sometimes have to choose between gas and groceries. By every metric my family uses to measure success, I am failing spectacularly. But then there are moments that no salary could buy. Like when Terrence's grandmother grabbed my hands with tears streaming down her face, thanking me for saving her grandson's life. Terrence had been recruited by the Latin Kings at 13, already running errands for them, already learning to see violence as currency. Our music program gave him a different outlet for his anger. And now he's 16, still in school teaching younger kids to play drums. Or when Jasmine, who witnessed her father's murder at age 6 and hadn't spoken for 2 years, finally whispered her first word in our art therapy session. These victories don't show up on tax returns or LinkedIn profiles, but they reshape the entire trajectory of human lives. 2 weeks ago, everything I thought I knew about recognition and success got turned upside down. Our director, Mrs. Patricia Williams, called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Williams is 70 years old, has run this center for 3 decades, and has seen hundreds of idealistic young people burn out and leave for easier, better-paying work. She motioned for me to sit down, her face unreadable behind her thick glasses. The envelope she handed me bore the seal of the city of Chicago. My hand shook slightly as I opened it, expecting perhaps another funding cut, another program we'd have to cancel. Instead, I found myself reading and rereading the same paragraph 3 times before the words actually registered in my brain. I had been nominated for the Chicago Community Hero Award in the Youth Development and Mentorship category. The nomination had come from multiple families whose children attended our programs, coordinated by someone who wished to remain anonymous. The award ceremony would be held at the Palmer House Hilton in 2 weeks. Mrs. Williams smiled, then a rare full smile that transformed her usually stern face. She told me that in 30 years, she'd never seen anyone work as hard or care as deeply as I did. That the families I'd helped had been trying to find a way to thank me, to show the world what I meant to their children. That this nomination represented not just appreciation, but genuine recognition from the community that my work was changing lives. I sat in that office chair holding that invitation and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not quite pride, not exactly validation, but something closer to hope. Hope that maybe what I did actually mattered in ways that could be seen and acknowledged. Hope that my family might finally understand why I chose this path. Hope that all those nights I'd fallen asleep at my desk, creating lesson plans and writing grant proposals, had been worth something after all. That evening, I called Maria, my colleague who runs the senior programs at the center. Maria is 62 years old, has worked in nonprofits since before I was born, and has become the closest thing I have to a mentor. She squealed with delight when I told her the news, actually squealed like a teenager. She insisted we go out for coffee to celebrate her treat, and spent an hour telling me about all the young social workers she'd seen burn out over the years, and how she knew from my first day that I was different. That I had what she calls the holy fire, the thing that keeps you going when the work seems impossible and the world seems indifferent. The next Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes Chicago feel like a postcard of itself. I drove to my parents' house with the invitation tucked carefully in my purse, having practiced different ways to share the news during my 30-minute drive. The house looked the same as always, a 2-story colonial with perfect landscaping and a 2-car garage that held cars worth more than I'd make in 3 years. The smell of pot roast hit me as soon as I walked in Mom's traditional Sunday dinner that had been serving as the backdrop to family achievements and disappointments for as long as I could remember. Emma arrived 15 minutes after me in her new BMW, the one she'd been posting about on Instagram for the past month. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine. Her blonde hair freshly highlighted her business casual outfit, probably costing more than my monthly rent. She kissed the air near my cheek in that way that managed to be both a greeting and a dismissal, then immediately launched into a story about the new listings she'd acquired in the Gold Coast. Jake showed up last as always, still staring at his phone as he walked through the door. He managed to nod in my general direction while simultaneously texting and grabbing a beer from the fridge. Within minutes, he was describing his latest project, something about artificial intelligence and machine learning, that sailed completely over our parents' heads but impressed them nonetheless. The future, he called it, and Dad nodded like Jake had just revealed the meaning of life itself. Dinner unfolded in its typical pattern. Emma dominated the conversation with tales of her real estate victories, each story somehow more impressive than the last. She had just sold a condo to someone from the Bears organization she mentioned casually, dropping the name like it was supposed to mean something to me. Mom asked probing questions about commission percentages, while Dad offered investment advice based on market trends he'd read about in the Wall Street Journal. Jake interrupted occasionally to complain about his coworkers not understanding his vision, or to explain why his company's stock options would make him a millionaire before he turned 30. Nobody seemed to notice that I hadn't spoken beyond responding to direct questions about passing the salt, or confirming that yes, I was still working at the same place. Finally, during a brief lull between Emma's description of marble versus granite countertops, I cleared my throat. The sound seemed too loud in the sudden quiet, and 4 pairs of eyes turned to me with varying degrees of surprise, as if they'd forgotten I was there. I pulled the invitation from my purse, my fingers slightly damp with nervous sweat. The paper felt heavier than it should have as I explained about the nomination, about the award ceremony, about what this recognition meant for the center and for the work we did. I kept my voice steady, professional, the same tone I used when presenting to potential donors. The silence that followed stretched out like taffy, sticky and uncomfortable. Emma was the first to break it with a laugh that started low and built to something sharp and bright. Not a laugh of joy or congratulation, but the kind of laugh that cuts. A community award, she said, her voice dripping with something that wasn't quite contempt, but close enough. What is that, like a participation trophy? The kind they give out to make people feel better about themselves. I felt the words hit me like physical blows, each one precisely aimed. Emma had always been good at this, at finding exactly the right words to make my accomplishments seem small. I tried to explain that this was a citywide recognition, that hundreds of people were nominated, but only a few selected. But she was already shaking her head. Seriously, Della, she continued, her voice taking on that older sister tone that always made me feel about 6 years old. You're almost 30 and getting excited about some made-up award from a nonprofit. This is exactly why you're still struggling financially. You waste time on this stupid stuff instead of building a real career, instead of making something of yourself. The word stupid hung in the air like smoke from a blown-out candle. I looked to my parents for support, for even a token defense, but found none. Mom's smile was weak, watery, the kind she wore when she didn't want to take sides, but clearly had. That's nice, dear, she said, her voice carefully neutral. But maybe Emma has a point about focusing on your future. You can't work at that community center forever. Dad hadn't even looked up from his phone, his thumb scrolling through whatever was more interesting than his daughter's achievement. When he finally did speak, it was only to ask if there was any monetary component to the award, as if that was the only measure that mattered. Jake's contribution was a shrug and a question about prize money. When I said there wasn't any, just the recognition and the ceremony, he actually laughed. Not as cruel as Emma's laugh, but dismissive in its own way. Cool, I guess, he said, already turning his attention back to his phone. At least it's something to put on your resume if you ever decide to get a real job. Emma wasn't finished, though. She never was when she sensed weakness. She pulled out her phone and started showing pictures from her company's most recent awards gala held at some resort in Scottsdale. Look at this, she said, swiping through images of herself in a designer gown, standing next to people whose names appeared regularly in the Chicago Tribune's business section. This is what real success looks like, Della. Not some pity award for babysitting poor kids. She went on to speculate about the venue for my ceremony, suggesting they probably rented out small conference rooms for what she called these little charity things. She wondered aloud how much the organization's executives made while people like me worked for nothing, implying that I was being used too naive to see it. Every word was calculated to diminish not just the award, but my entire career, my choices, my life. I tried once more to explain the impact of our program, started to tell them about Marcus and Keisha and Terrence, but Emma interrupted before I could finish a single sentence. "Save the sob stories for your grant applications," she said. "We all know you're doing important work or whatever, but let's not pretend it's anything more than volunteer work that happens to pay a tiny salary." The pot roast turned to cardboard in my mouth. I excused myself earlier than usual, claiming I had work to prepare for Monday. Nobody protested my leaving. As I gathered my things, I heard Emma already moving on to her next story. Something about a celebrity client and my parents' eager questions filling the space I'd left behind. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and barely contained tears. I kept hearing Emma's laugh, that sharp sound that seemed to echo in my chest. The word stupid played on repeat in my mind, each repetition making the invitation in my purse feel more and more like the participation trophy Emma had called it. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I stood in my tiny apartment looking at the invitation I'd propped against my coffee maker. In the harsh light of my energy-saving bulbs, it did look less impressive than it had in Mrs. Williams's office. Just paper and ink, nothing that would change my bank balance or move me out of the studio apartment with its temperamental radiator. I checked my bank account while drinking instant coffee, a morning ritual that usually involved deep breathing and creative mathematics. $643 to last until the next paycheck in 11 days. Rent was due in a week. The gas tank was running on fumes. Student loan payments loomed like storm clouds. Emma's voice echoed in my mind, pointing out that at 29, I had less saved than most people spent on a weekend vacation. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was wasting my potential, throwing away my education on a job that would never pay enough to live comfortably. I could probably get hired at Emma's real estate firm tomorrow if I asked. She'd made the offer enough times, usually in front of other people, for maximum impact. I could wear nice clothes, drive a decent car, take vacations that didn't involve sleeping on friends' couches. I could be the version of successful my family would finally approve of. But then I walked into the community center that morning and everything shifted. Word had already spread about my nomination. I don't know how kids find things out, but they have an intelligence network that would put the CIA to shame. Before I even reached my office, I was surrounded by a swarm of excited voices. "Ms. Della, you're famous," shouted Keisha, waving a piece of paper that turned out to be a hand-drawn congratulations card. She'd used every crayon in the box and covered the entire page with hearts and stars and the words, "Best teacher ever," in purple glitter glue that was definitely going to get everywhere. Marcus stood slightly apart from the younger kids, trying to play it cool the way 12-year-olds do. But I saw the smile he was fighting, saw the pride in his eyes when he handed me his own card. It was more restrained than Keisha's, just a simple "Congratulations, Ms. D" in his careful handwriting. But underneath he'd written, "You deserve 100 awards." And that broke through my morning's despair like sunlight through storm clouds. Throughout the day, more kids approached me with cards, drawings, and heartfelt congratulations that had nothing to do with the size of the award or the prestige of the venue. Jasmine, who still rarely spoke, handed me a painting of a sunrise with the words, "Thank you," painted in yellow across the bottom. Terrence's grandmother stopped by during lunch to hug me with tears in her eyes, telling me that this award wasn't nearly enough recognition for what I'd done for her family. Maria found me during my planning period when I was sitting at my desk, surrounded by the kids' handmade cards. She took one look at my face and somehow knew exactly what had happened with my family. She had that gift Maria did of reading people's hearts like they were written in large print. "Let me guess," she said, settling into the rickety chair across from my desk. "They didn't understand. They made it seem small. Someone, probably a sibling, called it stupid or pointless or suggested it wasn't real success." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Maria leaned forward, her weathered hands folding over mine. "I've been doing this work for 37 years, she said. "You know how many awards I've gotten? 0. You know how many kids I've helped? Thousands. The awards don't make the work valuable, mija. The work makes the awards valuable." But sometimes, she added with a knowing smile, "the world needs to see what we see every day. Sometimes recognition helps others understand that what we do here matters." That afternoon, I received an email from the award committee with more details about the ceremony. Reading through it, I realized this was bigger than Emma had assumed. The guest list included major philanthropists, city council members, corporate executives from Chicago's biggest companies. The media would be present. The mayor would be speaking. This wasn't some small gathering in a back room. This was a significant city event, but I still had to figure out what to wear. My closet was a sad collection of professional but worn pieces. Things that looked fine for the community center but would stand out for all the wrong reasons at the Palmer House Hilton. After work, I drove to 3 different thrift stores searching for something appropriate. At the Salvation Army on Clybourne, I found a navy blue dress that looked like it had barely been worn. Simple, elegant, professional. $22, which meant I'd be eating ramen for the next few days, but it was worth it. That evening, Emma started a family group chat thread that would become my personal nightmare for the next week. She'd found an article titled Millennials and the Participation Trophy Culture: How False Achievement is Ruining a Generation, and shared it with the comment, "Reminded me of someone's big award, LOL." Mom responded with a heart emoji. Dad liked it. Jake added 3 laughing emojis and the comment, "Savage but true." I typed and deleted a dozen responses. I wanted to send them the email about the ceremony details to prove this was legitimate. I wanted to defend my work, my choices, my life. But I knew it wouldn't matter. They'd already decided what my award meant, what my career meant, what I meant. So I put the phone aside and spent the evening reviewing the speech I'd need to give if I won. Tuesday brought an unexpected ally. One of my former students, Deshawn, now a sophomore at DePaul studying engineering, saw the announcement on the city's website and shared it on his social media. He wrote a long post about how our after-school program had saved his life, how I'd tutored him in math when he was failing, how I'd helped him apply for scholarships when his parents didn't know how to navigate the system. The post went viral in our neighborhood, shared hundreds of times by other former students, current parents, and community members. By Wednesday, my phone was buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. College classmates who'd gone on to corporate jobs reached out to congratulate me. A professor who doubted my decision to work in nonprofits sent an email saying she was proud of me. Even my high school guidance counselor, now retired, somehow heard about it and sent a card. But the family group chat remained a source of constant hurt. Emma shared photos from some networking event she'd attended, making sure to mention the designer of her dress and the importance of the people she was standing next to. Jake posted about his company's latest funding round, throwing around numbers that made my annual salary look like pocket change. Mom added recipes for success she'd found online, all of them focused on financial achievement and professional advancement. Thursday night, I almost called the committee to cancel. I sat on my futon holding the phone, Emma's words echoing in my mind. Participation trophy, babysitting poor kids. What if she was right? What if I showed up and everyone could tell I didn't belong there? What if my thrift store dress stood out like a neon sign advertising my failure to achieve real success? Then I looked at the wall above my desk, covered in photos and letters from kids I'd worked with over the years. Marcus's first A on a math test, Keisha reading at her grade level celebration, Terrence performing at our music showcase, Jasmine's first self-portrait after months of art therapy. These weren't participation trophies. These were lives changed, futures, rewritten, cycles broken. I put the phone down without calling. I would go to that ceremony. Not for my family, not even for myself, really, but for every kid who'd ever been told they wouldn't amount to anything. For every single mother working 3 jobs who trusted me with her children. For every grandmother raising grandkids in a neighborhood the city had written off. For Maria and Mrs. Williams and everyone else who did this work without recognition. I would go and I would hold my head high. Friday arrived with the kind of brilliant October sunshine that makes Chicago look like it's showing off. I spent the morning at the center trying to focus on normal activities, while my stomach churned with anticipation. The kids were extra affectionate, giving me hugs and high fives throughout the day. Marcus slipped a note into my hand during math tutoring that said, "You got this, Ms. D," with a drawing of a trophy that was definitely traced from something online, but still made me tear up. That evening, I stood in my apartment looking at the navy dress hanging on the back of my door. Tomorrow night would either validate everything I'd chosen or confirm everything my family believed about my wasted potential. There was no middle ground. No comfortable space between those two possibilities. I ironed the dress twice, polished my one pair of decent shoes, and practiced my speech one more time. The family group chat had gone quiet, which was somehow worse than the mockery. It felt like they'd already dismissed tomorrow as unimportant, not even worth commenting on. No one had asked what time the ceremony was, if I needed a ride, if they could attend. The silence said everything their words hadn't. Saturday morning, I woke before dawn, too anxious to sleep. I spent the morning cleaning my apartment, as if having an organized space would somehow prepare me for the evening. Maria called to check on me, offering to pick me up so I wouldn't have to worry about parking. I accepted gratefully, not mentioning that I'd also been worried about my car breaking down on the way there. As afternoon turned to evening, I got ready slowly, carefully. My makeup had to be perfect, because there was no backup plan if I messed it up. The dress fit well better than most things I owned. I looked at myself in the small mirror above my dresser and saw someone who could almost pass for successful if you didn't look too closely at the shoes or the drugstore makeup or the anxiety written across my face. Maria arrived at 6:30, dressed in a beautiful purple dress I'd never seen before. She'd had her hair done, her nails painted. She looked like royalty, and when she saw me, she gasped and said I looked like a queen. We laughed at ourselves, two nonprofit workers playing dress up for a night, but there was something powerful in that laughter. We were going to walk into that ballroom like we belonged there, because we did. We'd earned our place through sweat and tears and countless hours of invisible labor. Tonight, for once, that labor would be seen. The Palmer House Hilton rose above East Monroe Street like a monument to old Chicago elegance. Maria pulled up to the valet station, and for a moment I considered telling her to keep driving. The building was intimidating in its grandeur, all marble and golden history. Presidents had stayed here. Celebrity weddings had been held here. And tonight, somehow, I would be honored here. The valet who took Maria's keys didn't blink at her 10-year-old Toyota. The doorman who held the massive glass door called us ladies and wished us a pleasant evening. Inside the lobby took my breath away. Chandeliers that looked like frozen fireworks cast warm light over marble floors, polished to mirror brightness. The ceiling, painted in elaborate designs, soared above us like a cathedral to success itself. We followed the signs to the Empire Ballroom, our heels clicking against marble in a rhythm that sounded more confident than I felt. Other attendees streamed around us, women in cocktail dresses that probably cost more than my car, men in suits that fit like they were born in them. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a gilded mirror and almost didn't recognize myself. The woman looking back appeared to belong here, or at least could pretend convincingly. The registration table was staffed by volunteers in matching black dresses with pearl necklaces. When I gave my name, the woman's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, Ms. Thompson," she said warmly. "You're one of our nominees. Congratulations, let me get your materials." She handed me a program printed on paper so thick it felt like fabric, a name tag with a red ribbon that marked me as a nominee, and a table assignment card. "Table 3, she said. "That's one of the front tables right by the stage. The mayor specifically requested that all nominees be seated where everyone can see them." The ballroom doors opened into a space that redefined my understanding of grandeur. The room could have held my entire apartment building. Round tables dressed in white linens and centered with towering floral arrangements filled the space. Each place setting had more silverware than I owned. The stage at the front looked like it was set for a Broadway production, with professional lighting and massive screens flanking both sides. Maria squeezed my hand as we made our way to table 3. The seats were already filling with people whose names I recognized from newspaper headlines. To my left sat Dr. Patricia Chen, who ran a free clinic on the West Side that had treated thousands of uninsured patients. To my right was James Washington, a former gang member who'd created a job training program that had placed hundreds of ex-convicts in legitimate careers. These weren't participation trophy recipients. These were people who'd changed the fabric of Chicago, who'd taken on problems the city itself couldn't solve. And somehow, impossibly, I was sitting among them. The program in my hands revealed the true scope of the evening. The presenting sponsors read like a Fortune 500 directory: Bank of America, United Airlines, Abbott Laboratories, McDonald's Corporation. The guest list included CEOs, aldermen, federal judges, university presidents. The Chicago Tribune Sun-Times, and all major news stations had media tables. As the room filled, I spotted news cameras being set up along the sides. Photographers roamed between tables. This wasn't going to be a small mention in a community newsletter. This was going to be covered like an actual news event. My phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Your sister thought this was a small room rental. Wait until she sees the Tribune tomorrow." The lights dimmed slightly, and conversations gradually quieted. A woman in a stunning silver gown took the stage, and I recognized her as Adelaide Morrison, CEO of one of Chicago's largest foundations, and a regular presence on every power list the city published. Her voice filled the room without effort as she welcomed everyone to the 43rd Annual Chicago Community Hero Awards. She spoke about the tradition of the awards, how they'd been created to recognize those who worked in the shadows to make Chicago brighter. She quoted Jane Addams and Harold Washington, linking tonight's honorees to a long tradition of Chicago citizens who refused to accept that some problems were unsolvable. Every person being recognized tonight, she said, had looked at injustice and decided to act. They hadn't waited for permission or resources or the perfect moment. They'd simply begun the work of change. Mayor Johnson took the stage next, and even from our table I could feel his energy. He spoke without notes, his voice carrying the Southside cadence that had helped get him elected. He talked about growing up in Englewood, about teachers and mentors who'd refused to let him become a statistic. He said that Chicago's greatest resource wasn't its architecture or its businesses, but its people, who refused to give up on each other. The awards began with the Healthcare Heroes category. Dr. Chen was one of 5 nominees. They played a video showing her clinic interviewing patients whose lives she'd saved. A diabetic grandmother who would have died without insulin. A construction worker who'd broken his back and had no insurance. Children who'd received vaccinations and dental care they couldn't otherwise afford. When they announced her as the winner, the standing ovation lasted so long she had to wait to give her speech. The Business Innovation for Social Good category came next. A young man who'd created a company that hired only formerly homeless individuals won, and his speech about believing in human potential, even when people couldn't believe in themselves, had half the room wiping their eyes. Each category revealed stories of extraordinary, ordinary people. A teacher who turned around a failing school by refusing to believe her students couldn't learn. A retired police officer who'd created a basketball league that had reduced youth crime by 60% in his neighborhood. An artist who transformed abandoned buildings into community art centers where kids could learn for free. Then Adelaide Morrison returned to the microphone. The next category, she announced, recognizes those who work specifically with our youth who refuse to accept that any child is beyond help, who see potential where others see problems. The Youth Development and Mentorship Award. My heart hammered so hard, I was sure the entire table could hear it. Maria reached over and grabbed my hand. On the massive screens, my face appeared alongside the 4 other nominees. The photo was one I didn't remember being taken, me sitting with a group of kids at the center, all of us laughing at something off camera. I looked happy. I looked like I belonged exactly where I was. They played a video that opened with Marcus talking about how I'd helped him with more than just homework, how I'd shown him he was smart when everyone else made him feel stupid. Keisha's mother appeared next, tears streaming as she described watching her daughter learn to read, knowing that poverty wouldn't define her future the way it had defined her past. Terrence's grandmother spoke about the night she'd thought she'd lost him to the streets and how our music program had given him back to her. The statistics appeared on screen. 212 youth directly served, 85% improvement in academic performance, 90% reduction in disciplinary incidents, 0 participants entering the juvenile justice system, college acceptance rate 3 times higher than the neighborhood average. But it was the last part of the video that undid me. Mrs. Williams appeared looking dignified and proud. Della Thompson, she said directly to the camera, represents the best of what social work can be. She doesn't see problems to be managed, but potential to be unleashed. She doesn't just work with these children. She loves them. And love, real love, changes everything it touches. Adelaide Morrison opened the envelope with theatrical slowness. The Youth Development and Mentorship Award goes to, she paused, and I swear time stopped. Della Thompson for transforming countless young lives through innovative programs at the Southside Community Center. The room erupted. Not polite applause, but a thunderous standing ovation. Maria was crying and laughing simultaneously, pushing me toward the stage. My legs felt disconnected from my body as I walked toward the stairs. The spotlight was blinding, but somehow I could see everything with perfect clarity. The mayor standing and applauding, CEOs on their feet, cameras flashing like strobes. Adelaide handed me the award, a crystal sculpture that caught the light and threw rainbows. It was heavier than I'd expected, substantial, in a way that made it impossible to dismiss as a participation trophy. Then she handed me an envelope, leaning in to whisper, "There's more. Open it at the microphone." I stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of faces and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter that I had to read twice before I could speak. Along with this award, I managed to say, my voice cracking, comes a $50,000 grant for the Southside Community Center. The ovation doubled in volume, but I wasn't done reading, and I continued a personal scholarship for me to pursue my master's degree in social work at Northwestern University, fully funded. Maria's scream of joy cut through the applause. I stood there holding the crystal award and the letter, trying to remember how to breathe. The teleprompter in front of me showed speech in large letters, and somehow I found my voice. "Thank you seems inadequate for something like this," I began. The room quieted immediately, everyone leaning in to listen. "This award doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every child who chose homework over the streets when the streets seemed like the only option. It belongs to every parent working 3 jobs who still finds time to ask about their child's day at our center. It belongs to every grandmother raising babies in neighborhoods the world has forgotten, who refuses to let those babies become statistics." I talked about Marcus and Keisha and Terrence and Jasmine, though I didn't use their names. I talked about potential being universal even when opportunity isn't. I talked about the miracle of watching a child realize they're smart, talented, worthy of investment. I talked about love being the most radical form of social justice. Because when you love someone, you can't accept a world that doesn't value them. The work we do at the Southside Community Center isn't about saving kids, I said, finding my rhythm now. It's about showing them they were never lost. It's about holding up a mirror that reflects their brilliance instead of society's assumptions. It's about creating space for them to become who they already are underneath the trauma and poverty and systemic neglect. I thanked Maria, who was now openly sobbing at our table. I thanked Mrs. Williams for trusting a 24-year-old with no experience but plenty of passion. I thanked every family who trusted us with their most precious possessions. And I thanked the children themselves who taught me that resilience isn't about being unbreakable, but about breaking and choosing to rebuild anyway. This city runs on the labor of people you'll never see on magazine covers, I concluded. People who wake up every day and choose to fight entropy with nothing but stubborn hope. This award recognizes that work, but more importantly, it recognizes that every child on the South Side deserves the same investment, the same belief, the same opportunity as children everywhere. Thank you for seeing what we see. Thank you for believing what we believe. Thank you for making it impossible to ignore the light that shines even in places people call dark. The standing ovation that followed lasted so long that Adelaide Morrison had to gently guide me off the stage. Photographers surrounded me, immediately flashbulbs creating a constellation of light. A reporter from the Tribune asked for an interview. Someone from ABC7 wanted to schedule a feature segment at the center. Business cards appeared in my hands from foundation executives, corporate philanthropists, people whose assistants had assistants. My phone started buzzing before I even made it back to my table. 17 missed calls from Emma, 12 from Mom, 8 from Jake, 43 text messages in the family group chat. I didn't look at any of them. This moment was mine, and I wasn't going to let their sudden interest dilute it. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Other awards were given, other speeches made, but I barely registered them. People kept approaching our table to congratulate me, to ask about the center, to offer support. A CEO from a tech company said she wanted to sponsor a computer lab. A foundation director mentioned a grant opportunity that could fund our programs for 3 years. A university professor asked if I'd be interested in guest lecturing about community-based interventions. During the dinner portion, which featured food I couldn't even identify, but tasted like success itself, James Washington leaned over and said something that would stay with me forever. "They don't give these awards to people doing small work," he said. "They give them to people doing the work that keeps the city's soul alive. Your sister can sell all the luxury condos she wants. You're selling hope. Which do you think the world needs more of?" Dr. Chen added her own perspective. "I've saved lives in my clinic," she said. "But you're saving futures. That's harder. That's more important. Don't let anyone, especially not family, make you doubt that." As dessert was served, something that involved gold leaf and looked too beautiful to eat, I finally looked at my phone. The family group chat was chaos. Emma's first message was a screenshot from someone's live stream of the ceremony. "OMG, is this real?" Followed by, "Why didn't you tell us it was this big?" Followed by, "My coworker just showed me you're trending on Twitter." Mom's messages were a frantic series of questions and sudden pride. "Della, why didn't you explain?" And "Mrs. Patterson from church just called to say you're on the news." And "We had no idea it was this important." Jake had sent a simple "holy shit," followed by "Northwestern is paying for your master's," followed by "That's actually incredible." But it was Emma's private message that revealed everything. "I need to call you. This is amazing. I always knew you'd make it big. I was using tough love to motivate you. You know, I've always been your biggest supporter, right? Can you get me invited to the next event? Some of those people could be amazing connections for my business." I put the phone away without responding. Maria saw my face and knew exactly what was happening. "They're all suddenly proud now, aren't they?" she said. "Now that the world has validated what you do, they want to claim they always believed in you." The ceremony concluded with all the winners being called back on stage for a final photo. Standing there holding my award, surrounded by people who dedicated their lives to service, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't about proving my family wrong anymore. It wasn't about their validation or their understanding. It was about recognizing that I'd been looking for approval in the wrong places. The approval that mattered was in Marcus's improved grades, in Keisha's reading level, in Terrence's music, in Jasmine's artwork. After the official program ended, the networking portion began. I stayed for another hour collecting business cards, making connections, scheduling meetings. Every conversation opened another door for the center. By the time Maria and I left, I had enough potential funding leads to transform our programs completely. In the car, Maria couldn't stop laughing and crying simultaneously. She finally admitted that she'd been the one to coordinate my nomination, spending months secretly collecting testimonials from families, compiling statistics, documenting outcomes. She'd submitted everything without telling me because she knew I'd never nominate myself. "You needed to see what everyone else already knows," she said. "That you're extraordinary, that what you do matters, that choosing service over salary doesn't make you less successful, it makes you differently successful." We stopped at a 24-hour diner on the way home, sitting in a booth in our formal dresses, eating pancakes at midnight, like we'd just come from prom instead of a professional event. Maria pulled out her phone and showed me that the Tribune's article was already online. The headline read, "Southside Social Worker Wins Prestigious Award, Transforms Community One Child at a Time." My phone continued buzzing with notifications. Former classmates sharing the article, professors congratulating me, people I'd never met commenting on how inspiring the story was. But I kept coming back to a comment from Deshawn, my former student. "Ms. D deserved this, and so much more. She saved my life and never asked for anything in return. Chicago is better because she's in it." By the time Maria dropped me off at my apartment, it was nearly 2 in the morning. I stood in my small studio, still wearing the navy dress, holding the Crystal Award. The space looked different, somehow, not shabby, but purposeful. This was the home of someone who'd chosen meaning over money impact, over income. This was the home of a Chicago community hero. Sunday morning arrived with 37 more missed calls from my family. I turned off my phone and spent the morning at the center instead. Even though it was closed, I had paperwork to catch up on, and I needed the familiarity of the space to ground myself after the surreal experience of the night before. But when I arrived, I found I wasn't alone. A news van was parked outside, and a small crowd of neighborhood residents had gathered. As soon as I got out of my car, they started applauding. Parents of kids in our program's, local business owners, elderly residents who'd watched the ceremony on the news. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose 3 grandchildren attended our after-school program, hugged me with tears streaming down her face, switching between English and Spanish to tell me how proud she was. The reporter wanted to do a segment about the center, showing where the award-winning programs happened. I unlocked the doors and let them in, watching as they filmed the art-covered walls, the small library I'd built with my own money, the music room Terrence had helped me organize. In the daylight without children filling the spaces, you could see how worn everything was. The carpet was patched, the computers were ancient, the furniture was all donated and mismatched. But the reporter said something that reframed it all. "This is what making miracles with nothing looks like," she said to the camera. After the news crew left, I sat in my office, finally ready to face my family's messages. Emma had called 18 more times. Her texts had evolved from excitement to frustration at my lack of response. The last one read, "This is exactly like you shutting us out when something good happens. We're your family." I almost laughed at the irony. They were my family when my success reflected well on them. But where was that family connection when they were calling my work stupid? Where was that bond when they were laughing at my dreams? Mom had left a voicemail that was Dianxing to Mom, managing to make my achievement about her feelings. "I just don't understand why you didn't explain better, Della. We would have been supportive if we'd known it was important. Mrs. Patterson has been calling all morning, and I don't know what to tell her about why we weren't at the ceremony." I finally turned my phone back on properly and found that the family group chat had exploded overnight. Emma had shared the Tribune article with commentary that rewrote history. "So proud of my baby sister, I always knew she was destined for greatness. This is what happens when you follow your passion with a little push from tough love." Jake had added his own revisionism. "Della's always been the real genius in the family. While we were chasing money, she was changing lives." Dad had finally contributed, probably after Mom made him, "Congratulations to our daughter. We raised you to make a difference." They'd even created plans without me. Emma had announced she'd be visiting the center on Monday to see where the magic happens, and had already told her real estate contacts about her philanthropist sister. Mom had scheduled a celebration dinner for next Sunday and invited extended family to meet their award-winning daughter. Jake wanted to know if I could connect him with some of the tech executives who'd attended the ceremony. I typed out a simple response. "Thank you for the messages. I need some time to process everything. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." Emma responded immediately. "Don't be dramatic, Della. We're trying to celebrate you." I turned the phone off again. Monday morning brought chaos to the center. The phone rang non-stop with donation offers, volunteer inquiries, and media requests. Mrs. Williams had to come in early to help manage it all. The $50,000 grant would be processed within 2 weeks, and she already had plans for how to use it: new computers, building repairs, expanded programs, and most importantly, hiring additional staff, so I wouldn't be doing the work of 3 people anymore. The children arrived to find their center transformed into something newsworthy. They were confused but excited, especially when they saw my picture in the newspaper Mrs. Williams had framed and hung in the entrance. Marcus stood in front of it for a long time, then turned to me with the most serious expression I'd ever seen on his 12-year-old face. "You showed them, Ms. D," he said quietly. "You showed everyone that we matter." Throughout the day, unexpected visitors arrived. Former students who'd seen the news came to congratulate me and share their own success stories. A girl I'd tutored 5 years ago was now in nursing school. A boy who'd been headed for gang life was working as an electrician's apprentice. They all said variations of the same thing I'd believed in them when no one else had, and that had made all the difference. Around lunch, Emma showed up unannounced with a photographer. She was dressed like she was going to a country club, completely out of place in our worn but warm center. She wanted photos of herself with the kids, with me, with the award which I'd brought to show the children. She spoke to the kids like they were props in her social media story, not individuals with names and personalities. When Keisha tried to show her a book she was reading, Emma barely glanced at it before turning back to her photographer. When Marcus asked who she was and Emma said she was my sister, I saw confusion cross his face. He'd heard me talk about my family, knew they didn't support my work. Now, here was Emma acting like she'd been part of this journey all along. I finally had to ask Emma to leave when she started talking to Mrs. Williams about partnership opportunities between the center and her real estate firm, clearly angling for the positive publicity association with the center would bring. Mrs. Williams, bless her, simply said that all partnerships had to align with our mission of serving children, not serving publicity needs. Emma left in a huff, but not before making sure her photographer had enough content for her social media rebrand as a philanthropist and community advocate. She'd added that to her bio that morning, I noticed right after luxury real estate specialist. Tuesday brought the meeting with Northwestern about my scholarship. Full tuition books and a living stipend that would actually allow me to focus on studies without working 3 jobs. The program director mentioned they'd been watching my work for years, that professors had used my programs as case studies in their classes. They wanted me not just as a student, but as someone who could teach others about grassroots community work. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same degree my parents said I was wasting was now being validated by one of the best universities in the country. The work they'd called babysitting was being studied as innovative intervention. The career they dismissed as not real was being recognized as essential. Wednesday's mail brought something unexpected, a handwritten letter from one of the CEOs I'd met at the ceremony. She'd grown up on the South Side, had been a kid like the ones I worked with. She wanted to fund a new initiative, whatever I thought was most needed. The check attached was for $100,000 made out to the center, with a note that said, "For whatever Della Thompson thinks will help most." I sat in my office holding that check, thinking about all the times I'd had to choose between buying supplies for the kids and paying my electric bill. Thinking about Emma flashing her commission checks, Jake talking about stock options, my parents worrying about my financial future. Here was more money than I'd make in 3 years, and it wasn't even for me. It was for the work. But somehow, that felt better than any personal windfall could have. That evening, I finally called my parents. Mom answered on the first ring, her voice bright with an enthusiasm I'd never heard when discussing my work before. She launched immediately into plans for Sunday's dinner, who she'd invited, what she was cooking, how proud she was. I let her talk for a while before interrupting. "Mom," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I need you to understand something. You weren't proud of me last week. You and Dad, Emma, Jake, you all made it clear that my work was an embarrassment, a waste of my potential. Now that the world has validated what I do, you want to celebrate. But I've been doing this exact same work for 5 years. The only thing that changed is that other people noticed." The silence on the other end stretched out. Finally, she said in a smaller voice, "We just wanted better for you, Della. We wanted you to be secure, successful." "I am successful," I replied. "I've been successful every day that a kid learned something new, every time a teenager chose homework over the streets, every time a parent trusted me with their child. You just couldn't see it because it didn't come with a big salary or a fancy car." She tried to defend herself to explain that they'd meant well, but I wasn't interested in their retroactive good intentions. I told her I'd come to dinner, but things weren't going to go back to how they were. I wouldn't pretend they'd been supportive. I wouldn't let them rewrite history to make themselves feel better. If they wanted to be part of my life going forward, they'd have to acknowledge who they'd really been, not who they wished they'd been. Thursday brought another surprise. Jake showed up at the center alone, no agenda. He looked uncomfortable in the space, too tall and too clean for the cheerful chaos of after-school time. But he sat down and actually watched me work. He watched me help Marcus with algebra, listened to me read with Keisha, observed the art therapy session with younger kids. After the kids left, he stayed to help me clean up. As we stacked chairs and picked up crayons, he said something that shocked me. "I've been writing code that helps rich people get richer," he said, "while you've been writing futures for kids who didn't have one. Which one of us is actually using our intelligence?" It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was an acknowledgement. He asked real questions about the programs, the challenges, the successes. He offered to teach coding to interested kids, not for publicity or connections, but because he'd seen Marcus's face light up when solving math problems, and thought that same joy might translate to programming. Friday afternoon, I was called back to Mrs. Williams's office. She had news that would change everything. The publicity from the award had caught the attention of a national foundation. They wanted to replicate our model in other cities. They were offering me a position as National Program Director, developing community centers across the country based on our approach. The salary was six figures. I'd be based in Chicago, but traveling to help establish programs elsewhere. I asked for time to think about it. It was everything my family would consider real success: money, prestige, a title that sounded important, but it would mean leaving direct service, leaving the daily contact with kids like Marcus and Keisha. It would mean becoming the kind of administrator who made decisions from offices instead of classrooms. That evening, Terrence performed at our monthly showcase. He'd written a song about second chances, about people who see you for who you could be instead of who you've been. His grandmother wept through the entire performance. Afterward, he handed me a card that said simply, "Thank you for not giving up on me." Inside, he'd written, "I'm gonna make you proud, Ms. D." How could I leave this? How could I trade these moments for board meetings and strategic plans? But then I thought about multiplication. If I could help create 10 centers, 50 centers, 100 centers. Like ours, how many Marcuses could be reached? How many Keishas could learn to read? How many Terrences could find their voice? Saturday, I met Maria for coffee to discuss the opportunity. She listened to my concerns, my fears about leaving direct service. Then she said something that clarified everything. Your gift isn't just working with kids, Mija. It's seeing what's possible and making others see it too. You could keep changing lives 20 at a time, or you could change thousands by teaching others what you know. She was right. The award hadn't just recognized my work, it had given me a platform. I could use that platform to stay comfortable in what I knew, or I could use it to expand what was possible for kids everywhere. That evening, I made my decision. I would take the position, but with conditions. I'd spend 3 days a week at our center maintaining direct service work. I'd bring practicing social workers into the planning process, not just administrators. And I'd ensure that any new center we established would be staffed by people from their own communities, people who understood the specific needs and cultures of their neighborhoods. Sunday dinner arrived with all the inevitability of a storm system. I drove to my parents' house with the windows down, autumn air clearing my head for what was sure to be a performance of revisionist family history. The house was fuller than usual. Mom had invited aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. Everyone wanted to meet the sudden success story, the daughter who'd made the newspaper. I could see my story being retrofitted into family lore, adjusted to make everyone look better. Emma had positioned herself as co-host, greeting people at the door like she'd been part of my journey. She wore a new outfit that probably cost more than the grant I just received, and she'd prepared a speech about how she'd always encouraged me to follow my dreams. I watched her tell cousin after cousin about her baby sister's big win, carefully editing out the part where she'd called it stupid. Mom had created a display on the dining room table. The Tribune article printed photos from the ceremony she'd found online, even my college graduation photo. She'd arranged it all like a shrine to parenting success to children who reflected well on their origins. The narrative was clear: they'd raised me right. And this was the natural result. Dad was in his element, explaining to his golf buddies about the importance of nonprofit work, as if he hadn't spent years suggesting I was wasting my education. He mentioned my Northwestern scholarship repeatedly, the prestige of the institution mattering more to him than what I'd be studying. Jake surprised me, though. When Uncle Robert made a joke about social workers being bleeding hearts who couldn't make it in the real world, Jake shut him down immediately. He talked about visiting the center, seeing the actual work, understanding that changing lives was harder than making money. He didn't let anyone diminish what I did, even when it would have been easier to laugh along. When Mom called everyone to dinner, she asked me to say grace. I stood at the head of the table looking at all these faces that shared my blood, but hadn't shared my journey, and said a prayer of gratitude for the people who'd actually supported me. For Maria, who'd believed when no one else did. For Mrs. Williams, who'd given me a chance. For every child who taught me that success isn't about what you earn, but what you learn. For every moment of doubt that had strengthened my resolve instead of breaking it. The amen was followed by Emma's prepared toast. She spoke about family bonds, about always knowing I was destined for greatness, about how she'd pushed me because she cared. It was beautifully delivered fiction, and I let her have it. This was her way of dealing with being wrong by pretending she never was. During dinner, I announced my new position as National Program Director. The reaction was telling. "Finally, a real job," Aunt Patricia exclaimed. Mom asked about the salary before asking about the work. Emma immediately wanted to know if there were real estate opportunities in the cities where I'd be establishing centers. But then 8-year-old cousin Lily, who'd been quiet all evening, asked the only question that mattered. Will you still get to help kids? Della, yes, I told her. Just more of them. She smiled and said, Good. Kids need help. Out of the mouths of babes. After dessert, Emma pulled me aside for a private conversation. She didn't apologize, not really, but she did something else. She admitted that my success made her question her own, that selling luxury real estate to people who already had everything felt hollow compared to changing lives. She asked in a moment of vulnerability I'd rarely seen if what she did mattered at all. I could have been cruel. I could have thrown her words back at her, reminded her of how she'd mocked what I did. Instead, I told her the truth that everyone has different gifts, different paths. But if she was questioning her impact, maybe that was worth exploring. Maybe she could use her skills differently. Develop affordable housing, help families find homes instead of just houses. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not as her little sister who'd made impractical choices, but as someone who'd found something she'd been looking for without knowing it, purpose beyond profit. Mom cornered me as I was leaving, pressing leftovers into my hands the way she always did, as if food could bridge the gaps between us. Della, she said, holding my hands, I know we haven't been what you needed, but we're proud of you now. Doesn't that count for something? I looked at her, this woman who'd given me life but couldn't see my life's value until strangers validated it. It counts, I said carefully, but not as much as it would have counted then. I needed you to believe in me when there was no award, no article, no evidence, except my word that what I was doing mattered. You couldn't give me that. And that's something we both have to live with. She started to cry, then not the manipulative tears she sometimes used, but real grief for the support she hadn't given, the faith she hadn't shown. I hugged her because she was still my mother, but I didn't absolve her. Some things can be forgiven but not forgotten, and the scar tissue of their doubt would always be part of my story. Driving home that night, I thought about family, both the one we're born into and the one we choose. My blood family had failed me in fundamental ways, but my chosen family, Maria, Mrs. Williams, the kids at the center, even the other award recipients who'd recognized me as one of their own, they'd held me up when the people who should have been my foundation were trying to tear me down. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Ms. D, my grandma says you're going to be helping kids all over the country now. That's cool, but you're still going to help me with algebra, right? I texted back, Always, Marcus. Some things don't change. And that was the truth. The award, the money, the new position, none of that changed who I was at my core. I was still the woman who got up at 5 in the morning to make sure kids had what they needed. I was still the person who saw potential where others saw problems. I was still Della Thompson's social worker, mentor, believer in impossible things. 6 months later, I stood in my new office, a strange phrase I was still getting used to. It was an actual office with windows and everything in the nonprofit foundation's Chicago headquarters. The walls were covered with photos from community centers across the country, each one representing a place where our model was taking root. The Southside Community Center had been transformed. The $50,000 grant, plus the additional $100,000 from the CEO donor, had allowed us to renovate completely. New computers lined the tech lab where Jake now volunteered twice a week teaching coding to eager teenagers. The music room had professional equipment donated by a recording studio that had heard Terrence's story. The library had grown from one bookshelf to an entire room, with reading nooks and study spaces. Marcus had just gotten accepted to a selective STEM program for high school. His grades had continued to improve, and he'd discovered a love for engineering through Jake's coding classes. He still met with me every Tuesday for algebra, even though he'd surpassed needing my help months ago. I think he came more to make sure I was okay, that success hadn't changed me. Keisha was reading 3 grade levels above her age, now devouring books faster than we could supply them. She'd started writing her own stories, tales of girls who overcame impossible odds through courage and kindness. Her mother had enrolled in our new parent literacy program, and they did homework together each evening, both of them learning, both of them growing. Terrence had been offered a scholarship to a performing arts school. His music had caught the attention of a local producer who'd seen the news coverage of the award ceremony. But more importantly, he'd become a mentor to younger kids, teaching them that music could be a voice for feelings too big for words. His grandmother sent me weekly updates, each one ending with, "Blessed by angels," meaning both Terrence and she insisted me. Jasmine had found her voice literally and figuratively. The art therapy had unlocked something in her, and she now spoke regularly, her words careful but clear. Her paintings had been displayed at a gallery downtown, part of an exhibition on youth resilience. She'd stood beside her work at the opening, quietly explaining her process to anyone who asked. The ripple effects continued beyond individual children. Our neighborhood had seen a 40% decrease in youth crime. School attendance was up, test scores had improved across the board. Other community centers were adopting our methods. And I was flying to different cities each week, helping establish programs, training staff, spreading the gospel of believing in children, regardless of circumstances. Emma had actually followed through on exploring affordable housing. She'd partnered with a nonprofit developer using her real estate knowledge to help working families find homes they could actually afford. She'd even started volunteering at our center once a month, and though she was still awkward with the kids, she was trying. Last week, she'd helped Keisha pick out books, and I'd seen her actually listen when Keisha explained why she loved each one. My parents had started volunteering too, Mom helping with our community dinners, and Dad teaching financial literacy to older teens. They still didn't fully understand why I'd chosen this path, but they'd stopped questioning it. The award had given them permission to be proud, even if that pride was still more about the recognition than the work itself. The Sunday dinners continued, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the family disappointment tolerated at the table. Now I was the one with stories everyone wanted to hear, adventures from different cities, successes that made the newspaper. It wasn't the relationship I'd wanted with them, but it was the one we had, and I'd learned to accept that some people can only see value through certain lenses. Jake had become genuinely involved in the work not just as a volunteer, but as someone who understood its importance. He'd developed an app for our programs, something that helped kids track their progress and celebrate their achievements. He'd done it for free in his spare time because he'd seen how technology could be a bridge instead of a barrier. Last month, he told me he was prouder of that app than anything he'd built for his company. My new position came with challenges I hadn't anticipated. Board meetings, where people who'd never set foot in a community center made decisions about programs. Donors who wanted to attach their names to everything, more concerned with recognition than impact. Bureaucracy that moved at the speed of molasses when kids needed help at the speed of light. But for every frustration, there were victories. A new center opened in Detroit, another in Milwaukee, programs reaching kids in places that had been written off as hopeless. I still worked direct service 3 days a week, keeping my hands in the actual work. It grounded me, reminded me why the administrative battles were worth fighting. Every child's smile, every breakthrough moment, every small victory added fuel to the fire that kept me going through budget meetings and strategic planning sessions. The Crystal Award sat on my shelf, not in my new office, but at the original center where the kids could see it. It had become something of a talisman for them, proof that the world sometimes recognizes what really matters. Marcus had asked if he could hold it once, and I'd watched him trace his fingers over the inscription, his face serious with the weight of possibility. Ms. D, he'd said, "You think I could win something like this someday?" I think I told him, "You could win something even better. You could be the reason someone else wins it." He'd smiled then, that rare, full smile that transformed his usually guarded face, and I'd seen his future stretch out before him, bright with promise, that no statistic could have predicted 6 months ago. The letter from Northwestern announcing my acceptance into the master's program was framed next to the award. Classes would start in the fall, and I was both excited and terrified. It had been years since I'd been a student, and imposter syndrome whispered that I didn't belong in those hallowed halls. But then I remembered that the same voice had once said, I didn't deserve the award, and I'd proven it wrong. Maria had been promoted to assistant director of the center, a title that came with a salary that finally matched her worth. She'd cried when Mrs. Williams announced it, 40 years of being undervalued finally corrected. We still had coffee every Saturday, still debriefed about the kids, the families, the small miracles and major victories. She kept me honest, reminded me where I came from, wouldn't let success change the core of who I was. Mrs. Williams was planning to retire next year, and she'd recommended me as her replacement if I wanted it. It would mean giving up the national position, returning to purely local work. The board had made it clear the job was mine if I wanted it, that they'd wait for my decision. It was an impossible choice, depth or breadth changing lives one at a time, or creating systems that could change thousands. But I'd learned that impossible choices were just decisions waiting for clarity, and clarity came from understanding what mattered most. For now, I was doing both, straddling two worlds, bringing the lessons of direct service to system change and the resources of system change to direct service. The night of the award ceremony felt like a lifetime ago, but its echoes continued. Just last week, a young woman had walked into the center, holding a newspaper clipping about the award. She was 24, fresh out of college with a social work degree, and her family had told her she was wasting her potential. She'd come to see if it was true that someone like her could make a difference, and make a living, could choose service without choosing poverty, could follow her heart without losing her head. I'd sat with her for an hour sharing my story, showing her around the center, introducing her to the kids. When she left, she had tears in her eyes and steel in her spine. She started volunteering the next day. And I saw myself in her, that holy fire Maria talked about, that unwillingness to accept that some problems were unsolvable. 1 year after the award ceremony, we held a celebration at the center. Not for me, but for the kids, the families, the community that had made everything possible. The space was packed with success stories. Marcus now thriving in his STEM program, Keisha reading at high school level at age 9, Terrence preparing for his performing arts audition, Jasmine speaking confidently about her art to a reporter who'd come to cover the event. Emma attended with our parents, and for once, she didn't try to make it about her. She watched me interact with the kids, saw the trust in their eyes, the love that flowed both directions. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "I was wrong," she said simply. "Not just about the award, but about everything. You're not the family failure. You're the only one of us who figured out what actually matters." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was real, and that was enough. The reporter asked me to reflect on the past year, on how the award had changed my life. I thought about the question carefully because the truth was complicated. The award hadn't changed who I was, but it had changed what I could do. It had opened doors not just for me, but for every child we served. It had forced people to see value where they'd only seen problems. It had proven that sometimes the people society overlooks are the ones doing the work that holds society together. But more than that, it had taught me that validation can't come from outside sources, not really. My family's approval, once so desperately sought, no longer defined my worth. The award was wonderful, the recognition meaningful. But the real validation came from Marcus's improved grades, Keisha's love of reading, Terrence's music, Jasmine's voice. It came from knowing that somewhere in Detroit, Milwaukee, St. Louis children were getting chances they wouldn't have had, because I'd chosen service over salary, purpose over profit. Standing in that crowded community center, surrounded by lives changed and futures rewritten. I thought about that night when Emma had called my invitation stupid. She'd been wrong, obviously, but in a strange way, she'd also done me a favor. Her mockery had forced me to examine why I did this work, to understand that its value didn't depend on anyone else's recognition. The award had simply confirmed what I'd always known, but been afraid to fully claim that changing lives is the highest form of success, even when it doesn't come with a six-figure salary or a luxury car. Mrs. Williams called me to the front of the room for a toast. As I stood there looking at all these faces, some who'd been with me from the beginning, others who joined because of what we'd built together, I raised my glass of punch and spoke from my heart. To everyone who believed when there was no reason to believe. To every child who chose hope when the world offered only despair. To every family that trusted us with their most precious gifts. To every volunteer who gave time worth more than money. To every donor who understood that investment in children is investment in the future. And to everyone who was ever told their dreams were stupid, that their work didn't matter, that their choices were wrong, Look around this room. This is what stupid looks like. This is what happens when you refuse to let others define your worth. The cheer that went up could probably be heard all the way to Oak Park, where my family lived in their comfortable house, with their comfortable definitions of success. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about the next Marcus who would walk through our doors, the next Keisha, who would discover the magic of reading the next Terrence, who would find their voice the next Jasmine, who would learn to speak their truth. The award sat in its place of honor, catching the late afternoon light, throwing rainbows on the walls covered with children's art. But it was just a symbol now, a reminder of a night when the world briefly paid attention to work that had been happening all along. The real awards were the high school acceptances, the college scholarships, the jobs obtained, the cycles broken, the futures rewritten. As the celebration continued around me, Maria appeared at my side as she always did when I needed grounding. "You know what the best part is?" she said, watching Keisha read to a group of younger children. "That night didn't change everything. You'd already changed everything. That night just made other people notice." She was right, of course. The work had been valuable before the award, and would continue to be valuable long after the newspaper clippings yellowed and the crystal gathered dust. Success had never been about recognition. It had always been about Keisha learning to read, Marcus finding his confidence, Terrence discovering his voice, Jasmine reclaiming her words. To everyone watching who has ever been told your dreams don't matter, who has been mocked for choosing purpose over profit, who has been dismissed by the very people who should support you. Most, remember this. Your worth isn't determined by your family's understanding or society's recognition. Your worth is determined by the lives you touch, the changes you make, the love you put into the world. Sometimes the world notices, sometimes it doesn't, but the work remains valuable either way. That night when my sister called my award invitation stupid, she thought she was stating a fact. Instead, she was revealing a limitation, her own inability to see value beyond traditional metrics. That same night didn't just silence everyone who doubted me. It freed me from needing their validation. And that freedom, more than any award or recognition, changed everything. If you're watching this and you've ever been in my position, undervalued by family, dismissed by society, working in the shadows to bring light to dark places, I want you to know something. Your work matters. Your choice matters. You matter. Whether or not you ever get an award, whether or not your family ever understands, whether or not the world ever notices, you are changing lives. And that is the highest form of success there is. What dreams of yours have others called stupid? How did you find the strength to pursue them anyway? Share your story in the comments below, because every story of perseverance helps someone else keep going. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that their dreams aren't stupid, that their work matters, that choosing purpose over profit is not just valid, but vital. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the people closest to us become our biggest obstacles, but their limitations don't have to become ours. Keep doing the work that matters, even when, especially when the world calls it stupid.